Hey everyone, it's been over 2 minutes, haven't been raped yet, unlike ethics in journalism. Hi, I'm Diana Davison, founder of the Lighthouse Project helping the falsely accused. I've been revisiting GamerGate in light of the Me Too movement, and I want to explain why it's important. Back in 2014, gamers were demonized by the media who focused on fringe elements and turned GamerGate into a pejorative label that basically meant you hate women. And the media en masse declared the gamer identity was dead. I want to compare this to how the media is controlling the Me Too movement to show that media corruption is still a live issue against which we have little defense. But what makes GamerGate incredibly unique is that people banded together to fight corrupt journalism and were able to do so more effectively than any other community. This is why online communities are under attack now, and YouTube is one of the main targets. As Tim Pool has effectively pointed out, anyone can create content now with little to no overhead and gain a larger viewership than many of the mainstream media organizations who are struggling to compete. In fact, the media have had to change the way they do business in order to survive, and many are not surviving very well. This is why identity has now become a prime currency, and anyone who disagrees with the mainstream talking points or opinions is vilified as a public enemy, with words like misogyny, alt-right, fascist, or bigot. And people who have developed their own online audience are main targets for smears and deplatforming. To make those labels more consequential, online mobs target the employment of anyone who dares to challenge the social justice elites. And if anyone gets online support, well, they're mocked as having been banished to the manosphere. One of the key figures in Me Too, scribbler Ronan Farrow, received a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting. He also reported on GamerGate back in 2014. Now, Pharaoh, who I call Smug Bastard, seems to take absolute glee in naming and destroying men's lives. Because he has some daddy issues. His father, Woody Allen, was cleared of sexual abuse allegations against Pharaoh's sister, Dylan, during a brutal custody battle, and to this day, Ronan, formerly named Satchel, as in baggage, wants someone to pay for their failure to destroy his father. To look at Pharaoh's reporting ethics, Pharaoh interviewed Zoe Quinn in 2014 about being the target of GamerGate.
GamerGate's pretty hard to summarize. In its simplest form, it's a torrent of attacks against women in an industry now gaining increasingly prominent places in our culture. Gaming was a $21 billion industry in 2013.
In which he simply gave her space to say anything she wanted. It wasn't really an interview at all. Pharaoh sat on the edge of his seat, practically salivating and saying, "Tell me more about the misogyny."
40% of Americans who are just being acquainted with the gaming industry now because they don't play games, what would you tell them to think of this business when all they know of it is these hateful threats against women?
To make it worse, when Pharaoh agreed to have Christina Hoff Sommers on his show to create some sort of balance on the issue, he cited a study which said women get more abuse online, and Hoff Sommers enlightened him that that study had already been debunked.
Great to be here.
So, first of all, this study shows that these misogynistic attacks are much more the norm, disproportionately so. After looking at that data, what do you say to people claiming this is actually about video game ethics?
Well, things happen quickly on the internet. That study has been taken apart several times. It turned out that the vast majority of the tweets were neutral.
But then Pharaoh goes on to cite the exact same study in his next sentence. So Hoff Sommers repeats the news to him.
So, on that claim that the tone was neutral, they did actually find in this same study that the tone was more negative towards women. What do you make of that?
Well, again, that study was tendentious. It was what we need desperately, and I think this is what a lot of gamers want. I don't think they are anti-women. They are pro-transparency. They are in favor of responsible research.
Pharaoh then goes on to assert the exact same beliefs, but this time without mentioning the study as his source.
We spoke to one of the women at the center of this controversy, Zoe Quinn. She was very defiant. Take a listen to this.
Now this is very important because in all of Ronan Farrow's published reporting, He insists that it was vigorously fact-checked, but when you look closely, that claim falls apart. With the publication of Pharaoh's new book about his Me Too reporting, a journalist named John Ziegler boldly called out Pharaoh's bullshit and the indications that he was playing fast and loose with the facts in his reporting on Matt Lauer. Consider also the reality that Pharaoh has effectively become an invested Me Too activist, making interviews he does with sex abuse accusers to be suspect for possible manipulation. You'll note in the same screenshot here that the woman, Brooke Nevels, describes her sexual encounters with Lauer as transactional. Every journalist should be trying to determine what the hell that means. Of course, in GamerGate, Zoe Quinn's sexual trysts were transactional in nature as well, but somehow it's always the men who are supposed to be blamed for that. I wonder if there will ever be room in the Me Too movement for men who find out that a woman who slept with them just did it to use them and get something they wanted. You know, transactional sex. GamerGate kind of has the answer to that question. If you try, you'll get labeled a misogynist just for asking. Indeed, when Matt Lauer issued an extremely well-written statement outlining the evidence that their encounter was consensual, and Nevels actively participated in the sex, Nevels condemned it as victim blaming. Ziegler goes on to point out how slippery Ronan Farrow was about addressing the fact that Nevels never used the word rape, and that his claim it was an open secret at NBC is intentionally misleading. Every source at NBC said that they only knew of a consensual affair. Now, after Ziegler's article was published, Matt Lauer contacted him and offered to give his side of the story, but for now it's an off-the-record interview. Ziegler was only allowed to characterize their talk, and no direct quotes, and to take a photo to prove that they'd actually met. In terms of media fairness and accuracy, you must remember Matt Lauer was an anchor on NBC's Today Show. He spent his entire career doing interviews. He knows all the key members of the media. He knows how they work and whether or not people can trust the media to tell their side of the story accurately. His conclusion? Matt Lauer does not trust the media. Meanwhile, the network, NBC, has refused to fire anyone else, despite pressure from Ronan Farrow, and one unnamed executive from NBC went so far as to call Pharaoh a terrorist. And I have to say that I agree. But Ronan Farrow isn't the only bad actor. Now, of course, anyone involved in GamerGate should be legitimately laughing right now. None of this is really news to them. Journalism, in its death rattle, is aptly described by Ronan Farrow's book title, Catch and Kill. But where Pharaoh's title is meant to describe powerful men who kill stories about them before they're published, the truth is that journalists, like Ronan Farrow, are desperately looking to stay relevant, so they will do anything to catch and kill a new Me Too accused. As such, any journalist who hasn't lost their job yet will rush to Pharaoh's defense, because they're doing the same thing. But they all know that his reporting is not reliable. In July 2016, Pharaoh was busted as a sanctimonious fraud after going on the Today Show with Matt Lauer and lying about an event that he attended. It's very revealing. See, Pharaoh had gotten himself a last-minute invitation to a party through a major liquor company that he'd given paid speeches for, but then he pretended that he'd snuck into this party and busted politicians making backroom deals with liquor companies. But of course, when he was busted, Pharaoh just doubled down on his lies and his career continued. And Ronan Farrow doesn't actually care about all women, just the ones that benefit him. In a 2016 open letter called Hard Questions for Ronan Farrow, director, producer, and screenwriter Robert B. Wide confronted Farrow's hypocrisy and bias, noting, "You further suggest that anyone expressing a dissenting point of view from yours is part of a well-orchestrated, robust publicity campaign." And that's where I want to end off today. Again, it's not really anything new for Gamergaters, aside from the fact that Me Too hit the gaming community just recently, when Zoe Quinn reared her nasty little head to falsely accuse indie developer Alec Holoka, resulting in his suicide just a couple of months ago. And yet again, anyone who cried foul was demonized, and Zoe Quinn got a raise. But one thing that is different about Gamergate from other industries is that, unlike Matt Lauer, there's a massive body of outlets for people to tell their side of the story. Because unlike other communities, gamers have made their own media on YouTube and in their own forums, and they have their own ways of communicating facts that don't include depending on ethical journalism. And that's where the rest of society has to learn from Gamergate. We need to hold dishonest journalists accountable, and maybe the best way to do that is to start profiling people like Ronan Farrow to stop them from destroying innocent lives. It's time to start naming names again and holding these journalists accountable.